good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are logging in from. Welcome, everybody. My name is Charlene Margot, and I am the co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture that brings you this program, the Parent Education Series. We are delighted to have with us a new parent forum in English, and these events are offered in both English and Spanish. Today's presenter, many of you are familiar with, Dr. Eran Magen. But before I tell you a little bit more about him, I just wanted to say thank you to the Sequoia Healthcare District and the Sequoia Union High School District. This program is an initiative of Sequoia Healthcare District, so we are delighted to bring you these events. Again, we're going to have today about 20 minutes of content. The title of the program today is From Coercion to Cooperation, Building Alignment with Your Child. For many of you who have kids of any age, you know that this is a really important topic, and we can't wait to have a discussion about it with Dr. Magen. After that, we will have an open Q&A. We really hope that you will all come together with us, ask your questions of Dr. Magen. This is a meeting format, so we're together on screen. If you're comfortable, we'd love to see your faces, and if not, we understand that too, but we thank you all for being here. So just as a reminder, the content portion of this event will be recorded and available soon on our video library, which is our YouTube channel. We work with the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula to produce these videos. Usually takes them a few days to get them posted, and we will announce it in our weekly parent education newsletter. We do not record the conversational Q&A portion of this event because we really want to give you, the attendees, privacy and the ability to just interact freely with one another and with Dr. Magen. All right, well, let me tell you a little bit about today's featured presenter. Dr. Eran Magen is the founder of Parenting for Humans, a judgment-free, relationships-first approach to parenting that gives parents tools to enjoy stronger, more joyful relationships with their children and with themselves. He's also the founder of Early Alert, which works with universities, hospitals, and public schools to prevent suicide and promote wellness among students and employees. Dr. Magen earned his master's in education and PhD in psychology from Stanford University, completed his postdoctoral training in population health as a Robert Wood Johnson Health and Society Scholar, and served as the research director for the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Counseling and Psychological Services. His work has been published in top-tier scientific journals, including Psychological Science, Emotion, and Academic Pediatrics, and he has been cited in popular media ranging from Allure magazine to Psychology Today. Please join me in a really warm welcome for Eran Magen. Take it away, Eran.
Great, thank you, Charlene, for remembering my name when you're waiting a grandchild like yesterday. So hello, everybody. Nice to see Craig. And I'd really also love to see other people if you're so inclined to share your cameras. There's a few of us here. This could be a nice intimate event. We could pretend to all be cramming into a little minivan and sharing war stories. I will share my screen and talk at you for a little bit about today's topic. And then after that, I hope we can have a conversation about it, or about anything else you'd like to discuss. All right, so talking about coercion to cooperation. There, as usual, there's the link at the bottom there, and it'll be on the last slide as well for the slides here, in case you want to get them for yourselves later, if you're having a hard time falling asleep some night. Let's start. I now habitually put in this slide because I habitually forget to say this. To be clear, all this stuff that I'm talking about here is aspirational. None of us do this 100% of the time. I certainly don't. You know, we try to parent a little bit better every time. And the fact that you bother to make the time to show up here and keep learning about this and kind of sharpening your own skills and awareness as parents is amazing and good for you. And you're doing this for your kids and maybe for yourselves as well. And you're doing a good job just by the fact that you're able to be alive and your kids are alive and you're trying to be a good parent to them. That's great. You know, we're not looking for perfection. We're just trying to do our best here, and it's hard sometimes. And so I I know that I say things here that sometimes feel like they're total fantasy, and that's because sometimes they are. They're not all the time possible, right? This is the aspiration. This is what we're trying to do, but don't let this be a source of self-judgment or self-flagellation or anything like that. These are ideas and things for you to try and do. I'll start with the bottom line, as usual, for those of you that only have 30 seconds of concentration in them or can only fend off your kids and like leave them out of the bathroom where you're hiding, until they crash through the door. So the bottom line here today is that it's really helpful to get your kids buy-in when you are suggesting that they do something, or even asking that they do something. It's a step that we often skip. Sometimes it's so obvious to us why it's a good idea that we just say, how about you do this? And they're like, no. And you're like, what do you mean no? Yes, do it. And sometimes rolling back a little bit and talking about the why, it can be extremely helpful. So the main point here today really is get your kids buy-in, spend some time talking about the why really explicitly. And then the rest of the slides are going to be about how to bring up the why and how to talk about it. Okay, so you can let the kids into the bathroom now if you need to. I'll keep going here. Generally speaking, I am really much less likely to do anything at all if it makes no sense to me and if it feels bad. That's a typo. If it feels bad, but I am much more likely to do something when it makes sense to me and it feels good. And these are the two things that I propose focusing on when we talk with our kids. Another thing that makes it much more likely your child will cooperate with you is when you have a high relational account balance with them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but because many of you I think are familiar with this notion, but the idea is that if you build a lot of goodwill with your kid will do a lot of stuff just because you ask or just because you suggest, right? And will cooperate with ideas and suggestions you have. And you build goodwill by showing care and respect toward your child. And a lot of the things that I'll suggest here are, I think, strong expressions of respect for your child by inviting your child to think through it with you and consider what makes sense, what goals your child has. And you withdraw, you reduce the amount of goodwill in a relationship by showing your kid that you don't care about how your kid feels, or you don't respect your kid. If your kid sets up a boundary and you say, no, we're going to do it my way, I don't care what you want, that will reduce the amount of goodwill in the relationship. You can rely on goodwill alone when you're asking your kid to do something. That's the kind of trust me, it's a good idea approach. And it'll work if you have a good enough relationship. But every time you do this, that's essentially a withdrawal. You're asking your kid to act on faith, and you're using credit, and you can run out of credit eventually. And so it's just so much better to convince your kid to do something without having to rely on this kind of relational credit, right? This is a quick way that I like to think about kind of assessing how much goodwill is between me and my child right now. And so when I have a lot of goodwill, when my child has a lot of goodwill toward me, my child will spontaneously go out of his way to be helpful to me. This is the fantasy breakfast in bed scenario, surprise breakfast in bed. Hardly ever happens. Again, this is kind of aspirational. But if you're there, congratulations, and I'd like to talk with you. More common when things are going really well is you make a suggestion and your kid goes, sure, I'll do it. When you say, like, can you bring me the thing? And your kid goes, yeah, and goes and brings it. Or if you say, how would you feel about, helping with gardening? And your kid is like, like what? So like your kid is actually engaging, right? That's a good sign. If your kid doesn't have a lot of goodwill toward you, then basically your kid sometimes will agree and sometimes not. And you'll need to nudge, and you'll need to kind of follow up repeatedly, and it takes work. And if you force your kid to do things that your kid doesn't want to do by using your power over your child, then you run the risk of essentially going into overdraft of goodwill, where your kid might sit there and actively think about how to make your life more miserable. That's not a place where we want to be ever. And so the goal is to constantly be making these deposits into the relationship, increase the amount of goodwill so that your child is more willing to talk with you, so that your child is more willing to cooperate, trusts you more, believes in your goodwill toward your child, and so on. Okay, enough abstract, a little more concretely. This is a fun one. We can do a little quiz. But outcomes are better when the blank says that my blank understands me, cares about me, respects me, and wants to help me achieve my goals. So take a second just to think in your head what the blanks might be. Originally, this comes out of psychotherapy research. Therapy outcomes are better when the client says my therapist understands me, cares about me, respects me, and wants me to help me achieve my goals. Wants to help me achieve my goals. As far as I can tell, this applies basically everywhere, right? Certainly when the child says my parent understands me, cares about me, respects me, and wants to help me achieve my goals, you're going to see a lot more cooperation happening, right? You can do employee and employer. You can do student and teacher. This will work in a lot of different scenarios. But for us, this is about parents and kids. And really the way to sum it up is outcomes are better when your kid says we're a team. And it's clear to your kid that you are on your kid's side, that you are doing nothing more than providing wind to fill up your kid's sail. This takes a little bit of work. This is not something that all kids assume automatically of their parents all the time. And it's really good to be explicit about these things with your kids and to show them that you are orienting toward their goals, toward their priorities, or at times when you need to be prioritizing your own goals because you need to stay sane, to be honest about this and be very clear with them. This is for me, this is for you. And showing this kind of respect toward them. Sorry, I sort of skipped ahead here. So when the range of things that we might ask our kids to do is enormously broad, right? So this can go anywhere from, depending on the age of the child, you might still be working on your child agreeing to shower, brushing teeth, clearing dishes, walking the dog, cleaning the house, doing homework, saving money, writing college essays. There's just an enormous range. Considering going to see a therapist, approaching friends about difficulties that happened, doing more exercise, practicing the trombone. It's just an endless list of stuff that you might be asking your kid to do. And for all of these, I think a natural tendency is to say, okay, this is what's going to be good for my kid, and therefore I'll tell my kid to do this, and sometimes fight and sometimes clash. A really striking example that came up in a recent workshop that I did was a mom that was talking about her daughter, and she said, my daughter is just really unhappy, and I'd like her to be happier. I'd like her to orient, toward the good things in her life and see the good things that are happening and maybe consider seeing a therapist. And the place where she started essentially was by when her daughter was being upset and sad about things, to tell her daughter, let's look at the bright side, let's think about the good things, consider seeing a therapist and so on. And that didn't always go over very well, right? Because when we're upset, we don't want people to fix us. We want people to hear us. But also because, as it turns out, the mom, I think very naturally, it didn't occur to her to sit down with her daughter and say, how do you feel about how you feel, right? Do you feel like you're too sad? Do you feel okay with, does this feel right, perhaps? Right? Because it's a very different discussion if a child says, I'm fine with the way things are, I don't want to change them, then why would the child put any effort into changing them? And that requires conversation. So for all of this enormous range of things that you might be asking of your kids or suggesting to your kids or requiring of your kids, here's a process that I would suggest. You start by sharing an observation as neutrally and as cleanly as you can. Hey, Timmy, I noticed that over the past few months, your grades have been going down. They used to be just constant, kind of B plus, A minus. And now I'm seeing a couple of C's. I don't remember last time that I saw a B plus. So it just seems like things are getting worse grades wise. And then say nothing. Then just sit back and see what comes out of your kid's mouth, right? And ideally do this, as you say this, as neutrally or even as like warmly and pleasantly as you can, right? So this is not a, hey, Timmy, your grades are going down. It used to be all like B minuses, and now it's like, I'm seeing C's, what's up, right? It's not this. It's really just neutrally, warmly, here's what I'm observing. Hey, Jeff, I noticed the last few weeks, you've hardly ever gone out to play with friends. I remember you used to go a lot, and you played soccer outside all the time. And then the last few weeks, really, you're just home. And that's it. And stop and see what comes out of your kid's mouth. And just seeing their response and how they're starting to think about it can give you a lot of information. Again, do they think it's a problem? Do they think you think it's a problem? Are they worried about what you think? Are they worried about themselves? Maybe there's a reason for all of this happening, right? You can state really explicitly what's happening. And once they're done speaking their piece, then you can check in and say, well, what's your goal around this, right? So maybe you say, oh, your grades have gone down. And then your kid says, yeah, it's just, it's kind of boring and I could get on top of it if I needed to, but honestly, it just doesn't feel worth it. You're like, okay. And how important is it for you to be getting, better grades than this? And your kid's like, doesn't matter right now. I'm in 6th grade. I can catch up if I need to. Right? This may be a very different opinion than yours. So at this point, it makes a lot more sense to talk about the goal than about how to get better grades. Because if your kid doesn't even think that getting better grades is important, then you're going to be filling a sieve with water, right? If you're just pouring solutions into your child, right? Your child's not going to hold on to any of it. Your child doesn't think about it the same way that you do. So ask about the goal and see if you agree. If you don't agree about the goal, let's say you think higher grades are important, your kid doesn't. Let's say you think spending more time with friends is important and your kid doesn't. Let's say you think having clean hair is important and your kid doesn't, right? And if you don't agree, then discuss it. Like, can you go all the way down and figure out why this is important? Why do we wash our hair, right? Why are good grades important? Concretely, in a way that your kid can relate to. You might think about things that are like years into the future, right? And you can think about the future because you know how quickly 10 years can pass. Your kid may not have been alive for 10 years. And if your kid has been alive for 10 years, he has not, or she has not been alive for double that, you have. So you may need to, like Charlene, I keep thinking about this phrase you put in my head, right? You got to help people connect the dots. And for kids, you got to put the dots a little closer together. So it's very important to actually explain the rationale in a way that your child can relate to. Most of the time, this takes a little longer for sure, but most of the time this is possible, right? You hold your opinions for a reason. And if you're able to explain the rationale in a way that makes sense to your kid, you're off to the races, right? Because now your kid is like, oh yeah, okay. If you're not able to explain your rationale to the kid, then now you're left with just a bunch of less good options, right? You can force the child to do it and lose goodwill. You can tell the child, trust me, this is a good idea, even if you don't understand. This costs some relationship brownie points. All of these are legitimate, right? Kids will not understand everything, and it's okay to do it. It's just, if you can get it for free, why burn relationship points on it? Plus, the very act of discussing it with your kids build up the relationship enormously because it's so respectful. And this is something, just to underscore, this is something you can do from age 2 up, right? It's not, the conversations don't need to be deep, sophisticated, or even long. I have these conversations with, I had them with my son when he was 3 about why do we need to cut nails? And it took me a second to think about it. I was like, oh, your nails are long, let's cut them. And he was like, why? I don't want to. And I had to think about this for a minute, right? But then I could start explaining, well, when they're long, they can snag in things. Here, give me your finger, watch. And I would kind of take it across his pants and it would kind of snag it. And I would say, and that can really hurt, if you snag it accidentally when you move your hand fast. I don't want you to get hurt like that. And also you can scratch somebody by accident. You think it feels good if somebody scratches you, and he's like, no. So we can have these conversations at age 3, and we can have these conversations at age 14, right? If I'm talking with a child who doesn't care about school and trying to figure out why it matters, or doesn't care about fighting with a friend and figuring out a way to reconcile. So these conversations are enormously important, I think. And again, build enormous relationship goodwill as you have them. Okay, so you discuss, and then you check if you agree. I recommend not skipping that stage. If at some point you have to, then you have to, right? But ideally you don't. So if you agree on a goal, then you can start asking about the solution, right? So you can say, okay, so what do you think would be a way to address this? So let's say you talked with, I forget what his name was, maybe Timmy, about grades, and Timmy has come to the point of saying, oh, I can see why getting behind is not a good idea. It might be harder to catch up than I think. So I should probably be paying more attention and getting better grades. And then I suggest saying, okay, what do you think would be ways to go about it? And let them start generating solutions. First of all, they might come up with awesome solutions you didn't think about. Secondly, they might come up with really horrible solutions, but then realize that they don't have good solutions and ask you what you think. That's good too, right? Invited advice is so much better than uninvited advice, right? So start by asking, what do you think? They'll suggest solutions. See if you agree about them. If you don't agree about the solutions, discuss it. Here's what I think. We tried something like this. We haven't. Here's what I think could happen. Here's a downside. Here's the upside. Help them think through it. You are their prefrontal cortex, right? They're borrowing you as their complete brain. Be their advisor. Discuss it. See if you agree. Discuss it. See if you agree. Same thing as agreeing on the goal. Eventually, you'll agree on a solution. Touchdown. This is great. Then now you have a plan to implement. By agreeing on solution, by the way, I'm a big fan of offering experiments, right, for everybody. So your kid might say, I don't know. And you might say, how about we do this for a week? And let's see what happens. Let's see if it's truly horrible, or let's see if things improve, or, Also, if your kid suggests solutions that you're not a fan of, you can say, okay, let's experiment for a week and see what happens, right? That's only fair, as long as nobody's going to lose a leg over it, right? Let's try. Again, building the relationship, having humility in there, giving them the agency, modeling for them what it's like to agree, to try things, right? Because why should they be the only ones that always try things? Why can't you try? Sure you can, right? If the cost is acceptable to you, right? So you negotiate around it. So this is kind of a complicated flowchart, but the gist of it is this: discuss the goal, discuss the solution, and then hallelujah, right? Just make sure to discuss things, starting with discussing the goal. That's my main point here. All right, we talked about experiments. A couple of pro tips to finish. One is, I strongly recommend being explicit about your goodwill toward your child. This is probably a thing for relationships in general, right? We just assume the other person knows how much we care about the other person. It's amazing to hear it. It's great to say it. And it's a good thing to remind people. And when I say be explicit about your goodwill, I don't mean in a high-handed way. It's not, I'm only doing this for your own good. And it's not, right, everybody's favorite phrase. And it's not, this is good for you, that's why I'm doing it. It's not variations on this. It's being really clear. It's saying things like, in the course of the conversation, what's your goal about grades? I don't think they should be, I don't think grades really matter until I get to high school. Got it. Okay. And what do you think? How do your grades now affect your grades in high school? I don't know that they affected very much. Okay. Well, and is getting good grades in high school important in your opinion? Oh yeah. I want to go to a good college. Yeah. But I just don't think it's a big deal until then. Got it. Okay. So I hear you wanting to go to a good college. And I would love for you to go wherever you want to go. I want to support you in getting like that, right? So this is being explicit about it. Just taking a moment in the middle of conversation and saying, I want you to achieve your goals. I want you to feel the way you want to feel. I don't want you to be in pain. You know, it's very important for me. And so I'm trying to figure out how to help. That's my motivation here. So it takes a little practice to get to the point of being comfortable just kind of whipping out your goodwill in the middle of a conversation. But I think it's a good idea. And it lands well when you actually say it. And it reminds your kid that you are part of a team. You're not doing things to your kid. You're doing things for your kid and with your kid. Big difference. Okay, so that's pro tip number one. Number two, just to reiterate, make sure you agree on the goal. And you can go as far back, like you can get a higher level and higher level and higher level goal. Find agreement and then work your way from there. Right? You'll find it someplace up the pyramid. And if you don't, that'll make for some amazing conversations. But find agreement, find a goal you agree on. Be open to experiments. I talked about this already. I'm not going to belabor the point, but both because experiments are opportunities for everybody to learn, but also because you're modeling openness to new ideas, modeling, not just requiring openness to new ideas, but modeling. And then lastly, this connects to a broader topic of natural consequences. So some people say natural consequences as a euphemism for punishments. And I don't mean that. So just to be really explicit, this can actually be a really interesting separate session, I think, natural consequences. But to be really explicit, a punishment, as I understand it, is an artificial negative outcome that I generate when I don't like something that you did. Totally artificial. If I did not generate it, it would not have happened. A natural consequence is what happens when I don't intervene after you make a choice. Natural consequences can span the spectrum, right? They can go from being very minor to being horrific, right? If you don't grab your child back when they're about to like head out into traffic or something like that, right? That'll be horrific. So that's a natural consequence, but it doesn't make it acceptable. So natural consequences also have in them some threshold that you decide, right? Above which you're not willing to let your child make that decision. And it's your choice. It's different for different parents. There are a lot of things that most parents would agree on, but there are also some things that are different for different parents. But natural consequences are amazing learning opportunities. Amazing learning opportunities. And I'm a big fan of telling a child, when a child is discussing goals, discussing methods, and then eventually if you realize you disagree, but you realize that the natural consequence is not going to be catastrophic, to say, well, I have a different opinion. I think this thing might happen. That's my concern. And that's not what I want happening for you. But you know what? It's for you to decide. Let's see what happens. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe you'll learn something. And then after they do it and after the thing naturally happens, to debrief, this is where I finally get to my actual point, to debrief, but not in an I told you so kind of way, but to debrief in a true debrief fashion, coaching, trying to make sense of it, understanding. So to say, do you remember this thing happened and you thought it'll be this, and then this other concept, this other outcome happened and you were unhappy about it because you wanted this other thing, and your kid's like, yeah, say, and you remember I was suggesting this other thing, and this is all about tone and energy, right? Because the same exact words can land as an I told you so. But if you can say, you know, I had suggested this thing and you thought the other thing, and we said, let's experiment. And then this negative outcome came about. So what do you think? What did you learn from it? Do you want to do it the same way? Do you want to try it other, and just coaching and debriefing through it, not lording over, not I told you so. These are amazing learning opportunities if you're able to do it in a connected way. All right, I think that's everything. The bottom is the URL for the slides. We'll put it in the chat too for those that want, and then parentingforhumans.com. is my website, and there's other workshops and sessions like this that have been recorded. There you can also click on a thing to take a class. The class, there's a version of it now that's self-paced, where you can just do the exercises on your own or with someone else and then send it in and get feedback and so on. So totally at your own time. We cover these kinds of topics like we talked about today, but just more in depth and with actual exercises and debriefs without I told you so's. There's also a newsletter you can sign up for if you want to get notices about sessions like this